It's the Opperman Report. Join digital forensic investigator and PI Ed Opperman for an in-depth discussion of conspiracy theories, strategy of New World Order resistance, high-profile court cases in the news, and interviews with expert guests and authors on these topics and more. It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome to the Opperman Report. I am your host, private investigator Ed Opperman, and this show is brought to you by Audible.com. Go to audible.com/Opperman Report. Get yourself a free audio book. You sign up for free, get a free audio book. And as a matter of fact, our guest tonight, her book is on audio.
That's right.
We may actually sell another book on Audible.com, my second book. Okay, I'm looking forward to this. Tonight's show, we are live on, let's see, where are we live on? We are live on TalkSuperstation.com, public streaming radio network, awakeradio.us, awakeradio.uk, wolfspiritradio.com, 1800 online network, Shizaz Radio, Just Us Radio Network, Scottish Sovereigns on the Land, My Radio Stream, what else? We're also on Spreaker, TuneIn, and we'll be on later on tonight, iHeartRadio. Right after the show, it'll be up on YouTube. So tonight we have with us our guest, Laura Johnston Kohl, the author of Jonestown Survivor and Insider's Look. Laura, are you there?
I am here, yes. And so, just so you know, it's Johnston with a T, and my last name begins with a K. You wouldn't expect it, but it's really Kohl.
Well, didn't I say that?
You said Johnson.
Well, Johnson, yeah. That's excusable. But I think I said Cole. I think I got Cole correctly. Laura Johnston Kohl, the author of Jonestown Survivor and Insider's Look. And there's a link to that book on our blog, the Opperman Report, blogspot.com. So, Laura, why don't you tell us about yourself? And then we'll start getting into this whole story, because Laura was at Jonestown, actually in Georgetown, down there during the big death of the 900 people there at Jonestown, Guyana, the People's Temple. So introduce yourself, please.
Okay. So my name is Laura Johnston Kohl, and I am
And all of our little internet connections tonight. Let's see if maybe the internet's off altogether. No, we're still good. Internet's on. Just Laura Johnston Kohl. Yep, we got our internet is on. Hope she didn't lose her internet. That would be terrible. I would have 3 whole hours to fill.
Oh. Hi there. I don't know what happened.
That was Skype. We got a little bump there on Skype just as you began to talk.
Oh,
but
okay.
We got you back, and we're live on the air.
Okay, great. So I was born in Washington, D.C. in 1947, and I lived there most of my life. I had a few years in Texas while my parents sorted out that they wanted to get a divorce. And then my mom came back to Washington, and I was in, all my schooling was in Washington, D.C. in the suburbs. So that means that I grew up and graduated from high school in 1965. And that was the deadliest decade of American history on American soil, actually for at least a century. But we'd lost some of our greatest leaders during that 1 10-year period, and that was right when I was in my really formative time, the years between 15 and 22 or 25. That's when John Kennedy and Bobby Kennedy and Martin Luther King, Medgar Evers, Malcolm X, they all died in that one decade because people took it into their own hands to get rid of leaders they didn't like. And so that had a huge impact on the way I developed my political interest and my activism, because I did not want people robbing me of people I voted for or intended to vote for, and certainly not people who showed such courage in those times. So whatever part of me hadn't been turned into an activist before did at that time. I also was working and demonstrating against the war in Vietnam. And so one of the things that happened was, as I was walking down Fifth Avenue in New York demonstrating against the war, we were tear gassed, and I was walking with a friend and her dog, and we had to really protect the dog so that the tear gas wouldn't, kill the dog. So all of these different things really impacted me so much. I graduated from high school in 1965, and I went to college in Connecticut. I stayed there for 3 years as a philosophy major, and then really found that didn't fit what I wanted to do with my life. So I quit school. I started working. I got married. I kind of took a more conservative bent in a way, a turn in my life. But my marriage didn't work out, and afterwards, I lived and worked with the Black Panthers for about 6 months, trying to see if, I could help in that way. I was determined to have some impact on the world that I live in. I think I'm using the word impact a lot, but I think that's because my life was hit by several different meteorites or several different huge thrusts that really had made such a difference in the direction I took.
Well, let me ask you a couple of questions.
Okay.
When you got involved with the Black Panthers, how old were you?
I was 18.
18. Now, you mentioned, too, that you were born in Washington, D.C., and your parents were involved in politics. What did your parents do in D.C.?
Well, my mother, by the time we moved back to D.C., it turned out that my father really loved Texas and many things of Texas, and my mother really liked politics. So that was one of the issues that got them divorced. So my mother was there, but she was very involved with Adlai Stevenson and the Democratic Party and, the bloc chairman, and handing out flyers during that period of time from really 1956 on, when she was done with Eisenhower. She was ready to have somebody else in as president, and then Kennedy ran and he won. My sister got to go to the inaugural ball, the Kennedy's first inaugural ball. And so it was that kind of politics. It was in the democratic process. But my mother was a speechwriter. She worked for American Public Power. So one of the things she did was write a speech for one of the Kennedys on public power. And so she was right on Capitol Hill and worked closely with senators and congressmen, educating them about public power. So, at home, that was when she was PTA president. She was on the Rockville Planning Commission, so she could, figure out what zoning was correct and not. And she was just an advocate of activism. She integrated that into her life, even though the three of us, my two sisters and myself, kept her pretty active. Besides that, she really never stopped also trying to have an impact on the world around her.
Gotcha, but it was mostly the mainstream Democratic Party kind of politics, political. You know what I mean? Political hack. You might want to call it. In the political Democratic, right?
Right. The interesting thing about that, though, is that she was really felt really fragile as a parent of three daughters, and she was really trying to be, follow the straight and narrow, because she'd grown up during the McCarthy era.
Right.
So she never took a chance on doing something that would eventually harm us. She couldn't be anything left of the Democrat, because she worked at a conservative organization, and she really took her responsibility to us, more seriously than anything.
Okay, well, then let me ask you this. Before the show, I said I wasn't going to interrupt you. I was going to let you talk. But I apologize. But real quick, then how did she react? Two questions. One, were your sisters also involved with the Black Panthers and SDS and that kind of stuff? And how did your mom react to you being involved?
I am the kind of person that when I was in high school, I did everything to be the perfect daughter. If my mother said, graduate as a virgin, I was okay with that. She said, don't use drugs. I was fine with that. So while I was in high school, I did listen to her and her advice, and, I wasn't going to go against that. Although she told me to study more, I did not do that. But, basically I was like the perfect daughter until I hit 18. Then I applied for college as far away from home as I could get. I applied in Colorado and in Connecticut. I was accepted in Connecticut. And at that point, really, I made every decision myself, and I wasn't checking with anybody. And my psyche is such that I don't take advice well. I have to learn everything. I don't learn vicariously. If I see someone step in the hole, I'm not going to necessarily learn not to walk on that same path. And so really from the time I was 18, I was on a search to figure who I was. And so I'm not sure if I told my mother about the Black Panthers, unless they had answered the phone when she called or something. At that point, I wasn't checking with anybody about anything. I was going on my own gut, which got me in a lot of trouble. But that's the way I was. And so if she had an opinion about it, I don't remember that she told me. It certainly didn't change anything I was planning to do.
And the sisters didn't go off in your path as well?
No, they, they were involved in other things. My older sister was in school in Florida, and because she was doing sit-ins at the local lunch counter, she was uninvited for the next semester. So she did get kicked out of college because she was involved in lunchroom sit-ins to integrate areas. And my other sister has never really been political. So I was the youngest in the family, and so I had to carry my mother's banner, I guess.
Such a different time. Just think, that you had to protest and have a sit-in so that blacks could sit at the same lunch counter as whites.
That's right.
What a different time. Just think.
I'm so glad, too. I can't imagine having to start at that primitive level to try and get equality. I mean, that is so absurd, really.
And we have people like you to thank, who came. I'm only a little bit younger than you. I was born in 1962. And I marched down Fifth Avenue, too, as well, and was tear gassed and beaten. Marched with the hippies against rock against racism, all that kind of stuff. We march on Wall Street. So I can definitely take my hat off to you guys who preceded us. They really, really did the hard work to get segregation. You can imagine segregation.
I think that one of the events that I was really delighted to be part of was the exorcism of the Pentagon.
Okay.
Because we circled the Pentagon and we, and then we tried to hold hands and have it rise.
Did you actually see it levitate? Because some people claim they actually saw it levitate.
Yeah. I don't know that I was I don't know that I had used that many drugs that day. So.
Well, now, did you go through the whole LSD phase?
I did try LSD, and, after the Panthers hadn't worked for me, because I was pretty naive, really. And so after having the Panthers live in my apartment and having the meetings in the kitchen, actually, one of the funny parts about that was we used to have the business, the Panther weekly meetings in my kitchen. And so all the Panthers from the area would come in with their guitar cases and violin cases into my apartment. And so, in kind of a middle class, obviously white, because it was still segregated there, apartment building, here are all these guys who really did not look much like symphony orchestra band members, come into my apartment with guitars and violin cases. And then we'd have our meeting, and then they'd all leave with their violins and guitar cases. So I think that, if I had been able to be a fly on the wall, I would have loved to take a picture of that one. But anyway, after about 6 months, really the whole adventure with the Panthers wasn't working for me. So then I said, well, I guess I should probably see what everybody else is getting high about. And so I did go to Woodstock and say a day or two at Woodstock. And so I did try everything that came my way as I was moving through life, as I was, making my own decisions and mistakes. I tried, the drugs that were going by, but, even though I joined People's Temple and completely lost control, there is a part of me that is a control freak. And I didn't want to be on drugs so that I couldn't be coherent and making good choices for making my bad choices, actually. I wanted to be able to make my own bad choices without being drugged. So drugs didn't really work for me. I had to make my own choices. So I tried everything, but after the Panthers and then Woodstock, my sister, who had moved from Florida to San Francisco to the Haight-Ashbury, she told me that she thought since I had made a series of really lousy decisions from my marriage and divorce to the Panthers to Woodstock and everything in between, she thought I should move out with her into the Haight-Ashbury so that I could get myself together. So I moved to California and lived right across from Golden Gate Park in March of 1970. And that's when I met Jim Jones.
Okay, how'd that come about?
Well, she worked in the legal field. She worked for legal aid.
Before that, were you? Did you have any kind of faith? Were you religious or anything before Jim Jones?
No, I was always an atheist. Okay. I was not interested in church. I always felt I'm living my life, in a way, I try not to use other people and abuse other people. So I'm living my life, but I'm not going to be concerned about a heaven or hell or anything like that. Like I was really much more day to day than that. And I didn't think I was putting much money in the bank in terms of impressing a faith leader. So I really wasn't looking for faith.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah. So, I was in San Francisco living in the Haight-Ashbury, and so my sister had heard from her legal friends that there was this man up in Redwood Valley about 2 hours north who had a wonderful group of people who were part of his religion, and it was called People's Temple, and he had adopted 6 children of all different races, and that he and his wife, really were progressives, and they were very involved in all of the issues that I loved. And so I went up to Redwood Valley. My sister went with me 3 or 4 times, and then she said, it wasn't really what she was looking for. So I continued to go. She stopped going. And so, I went to People's Temple for about 6 months before I joined.
Well, let me ask you this. How long was the drive over to Redwood Valley?
It was 2 hours every Sunday morning.
Oh, so you drove 2 hours to go to church.
Right.
Now, at Redwood Valley, because around that time, didn't they have like armed guards and police dogs and stuff as well?
No.
No, you never saw anything like that?
No, in Redwood Valley, no.
Okay.
You're talking about, did we have it or did the city have it? Or
no, the People's Temple.
Oh, no.
Okay.
That was, we were, at that point, we were really rural and we hadn't developed our paranoia to that extent yet.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, so when I went, it was just, it was really just families who would go into we had this building in Redwood Valley that's in Mendocino County, and, you walk into the building, and so right behind the main place where the congregation sits, there was a swimming pool. So Jim would baptize people in the pool, and then all the kids would go swimming after the service. That was my kind of religion.
Oh, yeah, very cool. That's the kind of church I go to right now.
Yeah. So, it was kind of like, it was really hot up there. And so we'd have our service. People would be baptized. We'd have this enormous lunch that everybody provided. So we'd have, a big free meal. And then in the afternoon, all the kids would go swimming in the pool. And so I just loved it. I loved the whole concept of having it, the church used and all the kids having it, that swimming event available and everything. It was just great.
But then the thing is, after church at night, then you would drive 2 hours all the way back?
Yeah. So we would stay probably up until 1 or 2 in the afternoon, and then we'd drive home.
Wow.
So, so that went on for about 6 months. And so in a way, the worst part of that was then when I wasn't up in People's Temple, then I was making my own lousy decisions, which I brought with me from Connecticut. I was making those same bad decisions in San Francisco. So one of the things my mother always instilled in me, and if she had been a kind of person to be tattooed, she probably would have put it on her arm, is something to the effect of, be who you are, don't be a hypocrite. Don't lie about who you are or pretend you're something else. Whatever you are, own it. And then be that. Be true to that, And so when I was in People's Temple and I felt, that here I was kind of holy and I was, doing the good things and all those things, then I'd go back to San Francisco and live a completely different lifestyle. So there's a part of me that could not be that kind of a hypocrite, that I could sit in church pretending that, my mind was on all these fine things I could be doing, and then go back and, whether it was dating married men or getting involved in any other kinds of scams, it really didn't work for me in the long haul to be so two-faced about it. And so I really knew I had to make a choice. I could either go ahead and continue cycling down into the abyss, or I could get my act together and move into People's Temple and participate in something that seemed to be thriving and wonderful. And in August of 1970, Jim spoke to me and he said, Laura, I think that it's probably time for you to move up here now. And I kind of reflected on what was going on in my life in San Francisco, and he was right. I at least needed to be out of San Francisco and Haight-Ashbury. Wherever I ended up, that was not the good place for me. So I moved into People's Temple in August of 1970. I started working at the welfare department up in Mendocino County, and I worked there for 7 years. And then as part of the temple, I did all kinds of things.
How'd you get the job at the welfare department? Did Jim get that for you?
No, I had been, when I was in Connecticut and I worked for the Panthers, the way actually I met the Panthers was I worked at the welfare department in a housing project in Bridgeport. And it turned out that, the Panthers that I first started getting to know also lived in that project. And I started working with them with the free breakfasts. And I loved the free Panther breakfast. And they had an auditorium right next door to the building, the multi-service building that was at the housing project. So on my way in, I just come 2 hours early. I'd help at the Black Panther breakfast and then walk next door and go to work, which, made me really popular at the welfare department. But, again, I wasn't, I felt like I had to do what I had to do. And, really my whole life, other than the ending of Jonestown, I really, have had it. Things have gone my way more than they have gotten in my way.
But it seems like these jobs, the welfare department and with the Panthers, these were like city type jobs or state type jobs. Like sometimes they're considered like political patronage jobs. Were you able to get these kind of jobs because your mother had to hook in with the politics?
Oh, no, I was a flunky. I was an eligibility worker, and welfare department, I've had a lot of experience at welfare departments, and it was never a political job at my level.
Okay.
Mine was just intake. So, because I had 3 years of college, so in Connecticut, I was an eligibility worker. When I moved out to California, I just applied as a case aide, and I did intake on people who were, needing emergency funding or, AFDC or Medicare. So my job was, there was no prestige to my job, but it was a county job.
Gotcha. Now wasn't also, too, Jim Jones around that time in Redlands where he had, foster kids, and he was able to get the foster checks for these foster kids and stuff? Was that going on there?
Well, always. So, the Redlands is west of San Bernardino. So it's not Redlands, but it's Redwood Valley.
Redwood, sorry.
Yeah. So I think that we hadn't started, when I first moved into the temple, we hadn't started taking in any foster children. But what we did have is we had many senior citizens' homes. And a lot of the members who came with Jim from Indiana, because, he came from Indiana in the late 60s. And many of the people who were his parishioners in Indiana also had care homes there. And so when we got to California and we were in Ukiah and Redwood Valley, they started these same homes. And really the people who lived in the homes were just wonderfully taken care of. And, fed really, really well and, felt like they were part of the family of the temple members. Some of them came to the meetings, some didn't, but they were well fed and well taken care of. The people in People's Temple were very hard workers. So if they had care homes, then the people who lived in the care homes were, sparkling. The homes themselves were kept really well. The care was very tender and, we had a lot of care homes. Towards the end, we probably had, I don't know, I would say 25 or 30 different care homes where people were taken in, who were just community members, not members of People's Temple, but people who needed some kind of residential care. So we did that a lot. And then as we got established in Redwood Valley and Ukiah, we started having kids who were inner city kids who might live with their grandparents in San Francisco or Redwood or Los Angeles. They started moving out into the country and going to school up there. So the kids we took in primarily were kids of members of the temple or who, had come across the temple. We had one boarding care home for boys who were, who needed a lot of assistance in Redwood Valley. And then we had a few more like that of boarding care homes for children, but they didn't come to the meetings, but they were county sanctioned. And so we did get money for them, but they were living in really good circumstances. So there was never a time that we would bring somebody into a hellish situation and use the money and not take care of the kids.
Gotcha.
So,
now, what do you think the motivation, though? You think he was well-meaning, or do you think it was a money motivation?
Well, I mean, I think a lot of people who do that kind of business plan to at least break even. So I think that, he thought that if things were organized well and there was somebody who could oversee the finances to make sure financial decisions were done well, I'm sure he saw it as a moneymaker, but it was also employment for the people who worked there. So many of the people from the Bay Area moved up to Redwood Valley and they established a board and care home, and then they worked for the temple. They had their own, they paid their way with that. So, I mean, I don't think many people actually go into business of having 12 strangers in their home and do it out of just pure love. I mean, I don't know if that happens, but the people who did it were people who were very caring and they took good care of the people. So, I mean, I think it was a combination of both. He often talked about wanting to service people in the community and have them taken care of. And so he meant the greater community, not just People's Temple.
Well, let me ask you this now. Before he had invited you to move up there, I have two questions. Now, when you moved up there, were you provided housing, or you were on your own?
No, when I moved up, I moved into the home of the assistant minister. Okay. I had no income and I had no belongings because I had, moved from the East Coast. And so I moved up there and he just, let me move into one of the houses. And so that was before I was working or anything.
Have you stayed in touch with them?
Most of them were in Guyana, so they died. But one of the sons is alive, and I'm in contact a lot with his wife, who they had left the temple beforehand, and so I'm in touch a lot with, the family, mostly the wife, not him as much.
It must be devastating, not devastating, but it must be heartbreaking that so many of the people that in your life, pivotal people, influential people in your life, all passed in this tragedy.
That's right. I think that when I came back and I reflected back, I would sit with people and they say, she's been my best friend for 20 years. And it was actually hurt my heart that I couldn't say that about anybody.
Right.
Just these casual comments. Oh, yeah, my best friend, since I got out of college. Or, right. I've known her and she's been my best friend for this amount of time. And that whole thing was wiped out of my life.
And that's something that the rest of us, the 99% of us, can all just take for granted,
That's
right.
That's right. So, and I do it now. It's part of my life now. I talk a lot. Even the survivors, I have a friend from the survivors group, that I'm very much involved with, that I've known since 1970. So now I can say it again. Oh, yeah, I've known you for 45 years. We have been friends for 45 years. But at the very beginning, it just seemed like I lost everybody that was part of my adopted family.
Oh, boy. Okay. Well, we're coming up to a break. I was telling you about this break. It's a nice 4-minute break, but if we talk over the commercials, they'll hear us talk. So we'll be right back. After this is remind you, because I remind everybody when they talk anyway. So what are you going to do? But we are here tonight with Laura Johnston Kohl, the author of Jonestown Survivor and Insider's Look. And there's a link to that book on my blog, the Opperman Report, blogspot.com. We'll be right back after these messages. And now a word from our sponsors. We are listener-sponsored, and we appreciate your donations. If you like the show, please visit oppermanreport.com and click on the donate button. Or you can donate directly through PayPal at oppermanreport@gmail.com. We have Mike Ray of InfinityHomePlans.com. He's the host of Parlay over at CJ Mars Radio, Thursday evenings, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. If you need custom home designs, stock plans, or 3D work, he's your one-stop shop for home design and drafting needs. Mike Gray at InfinityHomePlans.com. At InfinityHomePlans.com. If you're looking for essential oils, stop by and check out Essentially Tammy on Facebook. She is Young Living Essential Oils Independent Distributor. And these are 100% therapeutic grade oils. They help support the body's natural functions. Visit her website posted on Essentially Tammy to see the current deals, or email at jocotami, JOCATAMI@yahoo.com, or call 352-239-8546. 352-239-8546. Hey, if you need a private investigator, go to my website, emailrevealer.com. We offer asset searches, locates, skip tracing, adoption investigations, online infidelity investigation. You can recover deleted text messages from a cell phone or trace an email to online dating websites to catch people cheating. That's emailrevealer.com, or you can call 800-572-9762. 800-572-9762, or emailrevealer.com, my PI website. Pacific West Bamboo. It's your premier source for construction and craft-grade bamboo poles. They're announcing their latest project with EcoHead Event Sanitation, making bamboo composting bathrooms and porta potties. Their first display will be at the Lucidity Festival in Santa Ynez, California, April 11th to the 13th. Come by and say hi and see what you can build with bamboo. Contact them for any kind of event planning, display building. If you need construction grade or craft grade bamboo products, call Amanda at 503-839-8126, 503-839-8126, or visit PacificWestBamboo.com, their brand new website. We're also sponsored by the New World Mexican Women. This is a rural Mexican craft women's cooperative. They are traditional makers of fine handcrafted, authentic jewelry. They use beautiful stone mosaics and Pacific blue Abilene inlay. They have a wonderful book of love letters written to their men in the United States, begging them to return to their families in Mexico. But they've written a new book, and it's it's about a young girl that falls in love with a rodeo bull rider and runs off with him without telling her family. It's a beautiful love story called Azuquina Part 1, Azuquina to the Rodeo. You can find their books and jewelry by clicking on their banner ad at oppermanreport.com or by Googling New World Mexican Women. You can also promote your business or website right here and have your ad played all over the world 7 days a week by emailing oppermanreport@gmail.com or calling 800-572-9762. Okay, welcome back to the Opperman Report. I am your host, private investigator Ed Opperman. Show's brought to you by audible.com. Go to audibletrial.com/Opperman Report. Get yourself a free audio book. We are here tonight with Laura Johnston Kohl, author of Jonestown Survivor. And she also has a website called JonestownSurvivor.com. So you can check her out over there, too, if you want to get a hold of her. Now, Laura, we were talking right before the break about how Jim Jones had invited you to come up there and join, become a full-blown member.
Uh-huh.
But now, before that, what was your relationship with Jim like before that? You just saw him around occasionally, or did you become close to him?
I think that The easiest way would be to say we were all familiar with him. He knew us by name. In Redwood Valley back then, he had come from Indiana in the late 60s with about 100 cars. And so it was a very small congregation. And so anybody who was new would be somebody he would, have a chance to talk to as he passed around, as he walked by. He'd say, "Hi, Laura, how are you doing?" I would see him, in kind of a familiar way. I knew who he was. He knew basically who I was. And even when he told me I should move up, I think he already knew at that point that it would be a good fit for me to be in the home with the assistant pastor. Maybe I needed that supervision and he could see that. I don't know. But anyway, he, knew enough about me to know what might work for me when I moved up there. So I would say, there was nothing intimate. Fortunately, I was never in a position to be one of his sex partners. He, he basically liked women who were a day over 18, and I was already married and divorced in 23 and, probably not his type. So I really never had to worry about the sexual part of his ministry, we'll call it, but we can get into that more later because I didn't really know about that at the time.
Well, now, let me ask you this again, in the Redwoods, Ukiah, kind of that period of time. You'd go to the services, right? Because I'm Pentecostal, okay, and I was an evangelist in a tent ministry for years, like 6 years. Oh yeah, so I'm familiar with this stuff. And I'm familiar too with like a church of about 200 members, how the pastor gets to know us. I'm very familiar with what you're talking about. Yeah. I'm also familiar with the gifts of the Spirit and healing. And one of the services would go on here would be healing services, correct?
Yes.
Now, you would watch this happen. Now, at the time, were you like convinced of this, or were you skeptical?
I would say that if I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, if I had just read about it on a book, in a book, or I had seen it on television, I wouldn't believe it. But I am absolutely convinced that there were times that he had a metaphysical gift and that he did heal people. And as I lived in People's Temple for the next 7 years, I met people who had been healed, around that time, and who for 7 years would swear that their lives had never been better because they had been healed from it. So there were absolutely people that I knew well who had been healed over the years. There's also, a lot of evidence, and I also believe that many of them, especially as he moved into San Francisco and had larger congregations and things, there were many of the healing services that were completely set up by his secretaries. So I know that he also had a scam that he ran that looked like healing. So later on, there were more and more really prefabricated healings that were not true. But I saw with my own eyes that there were healings that he did minister to, people he did heal of things early on.
Any other kind of miracles did you see?
Well, he would say things like a person would walk in the door of the meeting. He said, you just had a near miss on the freeway. That truck almost hit you in the head on. When you're in that section, you need to be very careful that you whatever it was. So he would be able to tell people of situations that they were in danger. A really interesting situation is one of my friends was in the Peace Corps, and when early in the 70s, he was in the Peace Corps, and his girlfriend at the time was a member of People's Temple. And so Jim at one point talked to her and said that, your friend was in Peru. I can't remember the names of the countries, so I'm not getting that right. But your friend is in Peru, and he just had some kind of a medical mishap, and they had to move him next door to, wherever it was, Chile or something. And but he'll be all right. And so she said, no, he didn't leave Peru. I would have known about it. He would have called me or something. That's not true. And so Jim said, yeah, he, had to leave because he had this incident happen. And she swore up and down that wasn't the case. And then several days later, she got the call from her friend who had been, everything that Jim said. And that's what made her move in, because there was no way for Jim to know her contacts down there, or there was no way for him to do research to find things out that she couldn't find out as the man's girlfriend. So things like that would happen. The whole issue of healings is pretty interesting, because I saw healings that were unquestioned. I heard Jim say things that he would have no way of knowing. And at the same time, he had secretaries who would visit people, stay in their homes, and then later on, those people would be called out and told what kind of medications they take and things like that, which were pretty obviously things that his secretaries had researched while they were in the house. So I think that the healings were pretty much pure in the 1970s, when Jim was younger, had more energy, was not put upon by so many other pressures, political and otherwise, like they were in San Francisco. And then as he moved from his state of mind in Ukiah and Redwood Valley and moved to San Francisco and being kind of a power broker and hobnobbing with the mayor and people in power in San Francisco, a lot of things took his energy, and so he was less apt to do the healings, and then more of the scams happened and more of the theatrics around healing took place then.
Now, when you were seeing the scam type healings go on, did you ever call him out on it, or call him out in front of other people, or?
I did not notice it. For one thing, most of the time when I was in either San Francisco or Los Angeles, I was outside of the meeting. We had a group of people called the greeters, and we would meet every new person who came into the meeting. Right. And if they seemed to be racist, or they were, out looking for, something other than looking for a totally integrated and kind of free-thinking radical group of, of religious folks who were, if they looked like they were there for some other reason, we would weed them out and tell them to come back to a meeting in a later time. But that kept a lot of us out of the meetings. And there were so many responsibilities in the temple. So the healing services, actually most people who were like in any kind of the worker bee, in the worker bee status in the temple, most of us were not in the meetings.
Gotcha. Okay, I can follow. Now, it's so funny too, when your phone buzzes, sometimes you sound like Darth Vader, It comes through on your voice just as you're talking at the perfect timing.
It's the metaphysical of Jim coming back to saying, okay, you didn't get it quite right.
He's reminding us, yeah. But now, did you see other gifts of the Spirit, other miracles and stuff besides healing and prophecy and words of knowledge like he's mentioned?
Well, another thing that's pretty interesting, of all the traveling we did, so people who lived in San Francisco would travel to Redwood Valley. In 1972, we bought a fleet of 13 Greyhound buses, and so we would travel from Redwood Valley to San Francisco to Los Angeles, and we'd alternate weekends. We'd drive all the way around the country. We never had any accidents in any of those buses ever, the 7 years that I drove.
Now, that must be one of the times of your life that you look back on as one of the most fun times ever.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so there was one woman who was killed coming from San Francisco to Redwood Valley. So she was killed, that one person. And other than that one traffic accident, as much as we traveled, thousands and thousands of miles. I mean, I drove around the country in a Greyhound bus. I drove a Greyhound bus around the country a number of times. I drove it to Canada and to Mexico, and we camped out on the beach in Ensenada in Mexico. I mean, all the driving we did, we never had an accident. So, you say, well, what is Jim's ministry? I think that for that to be the case, it is kind of a miracle, with as much traveling as we did, that there was no other car accident or bus accident.
I hear you. I hear you. I could tell a story, too, about when I was with the tent ministry and we had this truck, that had no brakes, practically. We were just coasting around. And, praise God, we made it, and I'm still here to talk about it, so thank God for that. Okay, so But that must have been living on those buses with all those people, all like-minded people, integrated people, all walks of life, living a socialist type of life, all sharing and living together. It must have been really beautiful time in your life.
Yep. Yeah. It was fun, and another part of it that was fun is if I was a driver, I'd be in the driver's seat, and when I had my break, I'd have an area outfitted in the underneath the bus luggage compartment. So we had mattresses there and sleeping bags, and so when we were taking our breaks from driving, we'd be in the luggage compartment underneath the bus. Yeah. And so I can remember many times being underneath the bus, toasty and cozy, and then I'd have to go to the bathroom. And so I'd have to knock on the roof of the luggage compartment so that loud enough for the person who had their feet, above me on the bus could yell to the driver, "Hey, driver, she has to pee, pull over."
Yeah, hopefully that guy wasn't asleep, right?
I know, yeah. So I'd have to, do it loudly enough to wake up somebody who was above me. So, but I mean, those are the kinds of things that you couldn't even imagine that, you would do that in your life. I mean, it was like really beyond or outside any kind of creative thinking about how to have a diverse and interesting life. There were so many things that I did in People's Temple that I could never have imagined myself doing. And that when I did it, it was so invigorating and exciting. I mean, my time in People's Temple was just a delight for me for most of the time. And I think that got in my way because if I saw things I didn't like, I didn't give them as much. I didn't really follow my gut. If I saw something that didn't look right, I'd be so busy, I'd say, okay, yeah, I don't know if I like that. Boom, gone. Yeah. And so I never had time to just stop and think and say, okay, so really that's not acceptable. I need to, do something about that. I never stopped to notice things like people talk about flags. I never stopped to acknowledge flags and try and process what that meant.
I can relate to that. And also, too, you mentioned, too, I heard in another interview that you also became involved in SDS before you went to the Jim Jones group. And in those leftist kind of political meetings and groups and organizations, it's the same kind of thing almost.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's the means justifies the ends. Right. That's really the way I actually believed that for a really long time. Even before the temple, I thought, so you're tired and so what? You need to do this. Or, so you cut class so you can go to a demonstration. You need to do this. Whatever it was, like I really felt that there were truths in the world, or there was a push in the world to do what you had to do no matter what. And so I felt that a lot in People's Temple. Jim would always hold up Che Guevara as a leader and said, he was having to run all over the place to get away from the powers that be, and yet he was brought down by somebody who was, with him, who was smoking a cigarette, and somehow the ashes allowed the drones, whatever they had at that time, to identify where he was in the bush so that he was killed. And so I was a very firm believer that you worked hard and you shut up to get the job done. And that was really my philosophy of life, that the ends did justify the means, and the ends were that we would have a utopian community where people were fed, where people could go to school and have a good education, where people were taken care of, where men were not just picked up off the street and put in prison with lousy lawyers who didn't fight their case. And all of those things, those were the things that were worth it. And then whatever, infringements along the way, unless they were major, they were just the price you had to pay. So I definitely fell into that belief system.
Now, when you were really in the faith and you were following Jim, would you try to recruit your friends and your sisters and your mother and stuff like that, saying, "Hey, join this church with me"?
I never did. I never did try and recruit anybody. I even notice it now, like if I'm doing a presentation, like I go all over the country to universities and libraries, and it's kind of a topic that people have to decide themselves if they're ready for it. Oh. Jim, love that.
Jim,
love that. I think that it's kind of a self-selecting group. And so I never did proselytize with my own friends. I did have a friend, though, who was in my high school class who got spinal meningitis the last part of my senior year. And she's still my friend today. But at one point, when I was impressed by Jim's healing, I wanted her to come because she was blind and has been in a wheelchair, really, and she's my age, 67. She's been in a wheelchair all those years. So at one point, I did ask her if she wanted to come out to California and come to Jim Jones's service, but she had more sense than I did, so she didn't go. But I think she was the only person I ever invited to come into the temple.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, so now you're up there now. You're living with the assistant pastor in his home there. You're working with the welfare department. What happens now?
So I did that for about a year or so, and then I branched out and started living in the communes. And we had these wonderful communes. We bought houses, and so young people about my age of all different backgrounds and races all lived in these communes. So first we lived in a commune about 2 miles down the road from the temple. Then we moved into a model commune right across the street from the temple. Then I moved to another commune, about 5 miles, still in Redwood Valley. So the communes, they were very popular around the country at that time, and so they worked well for People's Temple. So I could be in a commune, and I would, other people would move in. We'd turn in our checks to the people in charge, the treasurer of People's Temple. We turn in our checks, and then everything was purchased for us. Our cars were purchased, the food in the place, the medical care, dental care, anything we needed, clothing. We had a kind of a barn where you could go in and get clothing and toilet paper and all those kinds of supplies. So everything was provided, and then we got a little bit of walking around money during the month. But basically, everything we needed was bought for us through somebody who had, was clever with money and saving money and buying big purchases. We ate well, but not fancy food. Like, we weren't having steak dinners, but we would have like a box of oranges and a box of apples, the big, like 20 or 30 pound boxes. And we buy everything in this, in large quantities so that it was cheaper. And so we lived in those communes, and I lived in those communes for the next 6 years.
Okay.
In Redwood Valley.
And during this period of time, too, you were still a true believer. You were 100%. This is the greatest thing in the world.
I was a true believer till the very end, right. The very, very end. I mean, after the end, really. I was a true believer the whole time. Okay. So it never got old, and there was never a time I thought I'd leave.
Gotcha.
So during that time, though, when we were in Redwood Valley, so the printing was done in Redwood Valley. A number of us worked up there at the welfare department and had other jobs. But starting in 1972, when we started traveling more around California, we bought a temple building in San Francisco. First, we were in a high school, and we would rent it out on the weekend. And then we bought our own building in the Fillmore district of San Francisco. And so we would be in Redwood Valley on Wednesday night for kind of a house meeting, and then we would go to San Francisco for Friday night, Saturday, and Sunday. And then we tried going to other places, trying to see where there was a fit. We went to Seattle. For a couple of months, we went to Seattle one weekend. We went to San Francisco one weekend. We went to Fresno one weekend. We went to LA one weekend, and we kind of tried to feel where the congregations were that would continue coming. And we ended up, starting in 1973 or so, going to San Francisco one weekend and LA the other weekend. So that was our normal schedule. And then every 6 months, we take the buses and do a loop around the United States with, 6 or 7 buses filled with members in San Francisco and LA and Redwood Valley who could get off. And then we'd pick up a lot of people on those same tours. That's how more people joined. A lot of people were at a crossroads. We'd come through town, and they'd get on the bus and keep going with us or come out later.
Oh, yeah, I can believe that, because with the tent, the same thing would happen. Yeah, we'd put up a tent, and then you'd bring people with you. Did you guys ever do tent meetings?
We never had tent meetings, but we would be in churches that would, open their arms, and we would sleep in the churches a lot of times. Sure. A lot of times churches would have us, go to different members' homes and stay there. So, the funny part is I was all over the country. I mean, I was in Louisiana, in Florida and Georgia, but we never really left the temple. We never left the church we were in. So even though technically I had driven around the country, I never saw anything of the city. I never saw any of the sights or sightseeing or anything. But we'd travel. So we'd travel all day. We'd get to the church. We'd, freshen up, go have our service, go to sleep exhausted, and then wake up the next day and probably head off to the next meeting. We'd probably just stay in the city one or two nights at the most, and then keep on going around.
And eating a lot of mac and cheese and baked ziti, and everyone brings you pasta to eat, right?
A lot of things out of cans. Yeah. So we get the number 10 cans, and we carried our own food. There was no, we didn't stop at restaurants ever.
Right.
So we could carry our own water, our own Dr. Pepper, our own, canned green beans, and everything came out of those big number 10 cans for everybody on the buses.
I can relate. Okay, so then what happens next?
So as that happened, more and more people got involved with Jim Jones. And so he started having political clout in San Francisco. Since we had the buses, if Mayor Moscone or another political, another official were having any kind of a meeting, they could call Jim and say, I have a press conference coming up in 45 minutes and I have 3 people here to listen. So Jim would say, okay, I'll take care of it. And then within half an hour, he'd have 300 people who were picked up by the buses there to listen to whatever the proclamation was. So he started developing this relationship with the politicians that they depended on him to create the groundswell movement. So, and Jim would talk about politics, and we were a political power because the people would vote, they would know what's going on in the world, and they would go and support these candidates. So more and more, Jim endeared himself to local politicians. And even when Jimmy Carter and his wife came to San Francisco, Rosalind Carter sat down with Jim and spoke to him for an hour in a closed meeting. So he had clout that really worked its way up the whole chain of politicos at that time.
And would Jim actually tell you who to vote for?
He did not, but, even to this day, I've never had to question who to vote for. I mean, there are people who, answer the issues that I find important. So, he would talk about politics, but he didn't have to tell us if we had, Moscone's, if we all went to listen to Moscone 5 times before the election, then, we could assume that Moscone was supporting us and we were supporting him.
Gotcha.
So, you know what I mean? Like Jim was not somebody like some of these churches who say, okay, now I want you to vote for this guy because, he's my friend or he is going to do good things for us if we had no contact with him. He wasn't telling us that. But just by watching what's going on, you can tell who supports Jim and who would be an enemy. So, it was like we knew it was pretty clear. The writing was on the wall, even if Jim didn't tell us. But all people were encouraged to vote. Jim always said, always say your piece, go vote. Always. So, so both things are true. He wasn't specifically dictating who to vote for. On the other hand, he did make sure that we knew who our friends were in the government there.
Gotcha.
So, so as that was going on, Jim really started his decline then, I think. And I think some of these survivors agree with me because he was spread so thin. When we were in Redwood Valley, he really did have time to take on issues, delve into things. He often referenced, I talked to Angela Davis last night and C. Chavez or Dennis Banks or whoever he talked to. We visited mosques and, for the Nation of Islam when we traveled around the country. We had all these connections. But as power started going to his head, I think that his using his mistresses and secretaries became a lot more prevalent. I think that his healings, he was really distracted away from that kind of use of his energy. He was very much into the political, the back door politics of what was going on in San Francisco. He got involved with judges in different cases and WAPAC and a number of different things going on in San Francisco and Los Angeles. And he kept up this, schedule that most people could never keep up with, which was, driving to LA on Wednesday night, spending the night, having a service Thursday night, coming back up to San Francisco on Friday night. And so he was like on this loop all the time with all this other stuff going on. So I think that his message was diluted, and I think the purity, whatever purity he had, from different times in his life, I think that was all being kind of bought out because his ego was so enormous at that time.
All right, gotcha. Listen, we have to take a 5-minute break because this is a hard break we take at the top of the hour. We'll be back with Laura Johnston Kohl, Jonestown survivor and insider's story. We'll be right back after these messages.
Okay, thanks a lot.
It's the Opperman Report. Join digital forensic investigator and PI Ed Opperman for an in-depth discussion of conspiracy theories, strategy of New World Order resistance, high-profile court cases in the news, and interviews with expert guests and authors on these topics and more. It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
And now a word from our sponsors. We are listener-sponsored, and we appreciate your donations. If you like the show, please visit OppermanReport.com and click on the donate button, or you can donate directly through PayPal at OppermanReport@gmail.com. We have Mike Ray of InfinityHomeplans.com. He's the host of Parlay over at CJ Mars Radio, Thursday evenings, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. If you need custom home designs, stock plans, or 3D work, he's your one-stop shop for home design and drafting needs. Mike Ray at InfinityHomeplans.com. At InfinityHomeplans.com. If you're looking for essential oils, stop by and check out Essentially Tammy on Facebook. She is Young Living Essential Oils Independent Distributor. Now, these are 100% therapeutic grade oils. They help support the body's natural functions. You can visit her website posted on Essentially Tammy to see the current deals, or email at jocotami, JOCATAMI@yahoo.com, or call 352-239-8546. 352-239-8546. Hey, if you need a private investigator, go to my website, emailreviewer.com. We offer asset searches, locates, skip tracing, adoption investigations, online infidelity investigations. We can recover deleted text messages from a cell phone or trace an email to online dating websites to catch people cheating. That's emailrevealer.com, or you can call 800-572-9762. 800-572-9762, or emailrevealer.com, my PI website. Pacific West Bamboo. It's your premier source for construction and craft-grade bamboo poles. They're announcing their latest project with EcoHead Event Sanitation, making bamboo composting bathrooms and porta potties. Their first display will be at the Lucidity Festival in Santa Ynez, California, April 11th to the 13th. Come by and say hi and see what you can build with bamboo. Contact them for any kind of event planning, display building, If you need construction grade or craft grade bamboo products, call Amanda at 503-839-8126, 503-839-8126, or visit PacificWestBamboo.com, their brand new website. We're also sponsored by the New World Mexican Women. This is a rural Mexican craft women's cooperative. They are traditional makers of fine handcrafted, authentic jewelry, beautiful stone mosaics, and Pacific blue abalone inlay. They have a wonderful book of love letters written to their men in the United States, begging them to return to their families in Mexico. But they've written a new book, and it's it's about a young girl that falls in love with a rodeo bull rider and runs off with him without telling her family. It's a beautiful love story called Azuquina Part 1, Azuquina to the Rodeo. You can find their books and jewelry by clicking on their banner ad at OppermanReport.com or by Googling New World Mexican Women. You can also promote your business or website right here and have your ad played all over the world 7 days a week by emailing oppermanreport@gmail.com or calling 800-572-9762. Welcome back to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, Private Investigator Ed Opperman. Show is brought to you by Audible.com. Go to audibletrial.com/Opperman Report. Sign up for free. Get yourself a free audiobook. Our guest tonight, Laura Johnston Kohl, Jonestown survivor. She has a book up there on Audible.com. You can pick it up for free tonight. If you want to pay for it, you go to OppermanReportblogspot.com and click on the link. It'll take you right to Amazon. Pick up a book tonight. I just want to mention real quick, we're doing a special show this Sunday night, 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, and it's going to be about those escaped convicts and that big manhunt that's going on for these escaped convicts. One of our guests has some inside information. She lives in that town. Her boyfriend is in that prison right now, and she's going to be telling us about the condition. That prison is on lockdown, by the way. People don't realize that inside the prison right now, all the prisoners are on lockdown. And they're not allowed to talk to their friends, their families, their lawyers. They can't even speak to their attorneys right now. There was no communication going on from inside that prison to outside that prison. And our guest coming up this weekend, her boyfriend in there was beaten to a pulp and then put in solitary. And she has a big lawsuit against that prison as well. And we have the photographs, and she'll be coming on to discuss this. Tonight we are on with Laura Johnston Kohl, Jonestown survivor. Incredible detail from an insider's view of a period of time is just so fascinating. One thing I wanted to ask you before the break was when you mentioned how he was visiting with the Nation of Islam. Was this the Louis Farrakhan period of time?
Yes. It was in early 70, and we actually went to, I believe it was around Chicago that we traveled to a Nation of Islam their main building at that point. And then we also had pretty frequent visits with the one right on our neighbor in the Fillmore district in San Francisco. Often we would go and join their meetings. I don't know how often, but probably 8 or 10 times we actually went to meetings in their building.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. So I think that we kind of left off that we were talking about when Jim was in San Francisco, his schedule was pretty exhausting, and we all had exhausting schedules. And sometimes, some of the people who left at that time said that they were just too exhausted to keep going, and that also some of the decisions that we were making in the temple, those of us who stayed, were really affected by our state of exhaustion. One of the survivors told me that Jim had told her in 1972 that if you keep people poor and you keep them busy or running from one thing to the next, they'll never leave. And so I do think that he had that in mind, that he kept us so busy with so many things going on that it really was challenging for us to try and keep our critical thinking skills honed in on what was really going on. So that was his strategy early on, that by keeping us that busy and keeping us up late at night and all-night meetings and things like that, really he kind of wore down our defenses and even our sanity at some point, I think. Well,
let me ask you this. Do you think he learned that on his own, just instinctively?
Well, I have heard that he's always been a student. And in a way, it comes back to what did he learn when? I think that he was always a person who wanted to accumulate power. And so he wasn't so much a religious leader as somebody who saw that people in religion accrue power, or they gather power from people. And when he saw, would walk by churches and see huge congregations silent while the minister would give, his sermon, I think that he learned early on that that's the job he wanted. He wanted to be at the front of a huge crowd that would all acknowledge that he was wise and, charismatic. And so I think that's what drew him into being a minister in the first place. And what he did to back it up is memorize the Bible forward and backwards, so that if anyone had an issue or a question or a religious challenge, he would have the information to answer it.
Gotcha. But what do you make of the story about how when he was a youth that he was befriended by this youth police officer, and then later on that youth police officer went to South America, was involved in CIA training of torture and activities and stuff like that, and that Jones went there to South America as well and hooked up with this guy once again before heading over to Redwood
Valley?
Yeah.
Jim did go and live for 2 years in Brazil.
Right.
I don't know how much information, how much valid information is out about that. I do know he was in Brazil for 2 years, and his congregation kind of limped along back in Indiana. And I don't know anybody credible who's really described what went on in Brazil, and it could easily be that he met back up with the person. I do know one thing that I did not know when we talked about going to Guyana in the temple. Jim had been in Guyana in the 60s.
Right. So
he had been through Guyana and had checked it out for whatever he was interested in anyway, long before we ever determined that would be a place we wanted to go. So, I think that there are a lot of things in his past that have not been studied enough to know exactly what was going on. But I think that, with the madness he showed at the very end, that probably all of those would be good investigations to do. So, I don't doubt that he had alliances along the way, all kinds of alliances. Right. Even in 1972, he was busted in a sting operation in Los Angeles in a bathroom or, in some venue in Los Angeles that was a setup or sting operation. And so, I think that there...
Wait, hold on. I don't think I'm familiar with that. Like a homosexual type sting operation?
Yeah.
Really?
In Los Angeles, yeah. And so he made public to the people in Los Angeles that it was all part because he was in charge of a religious and a diverse, integrated group of people in the temple. And so he said it was a setup. But he was arrested in a sting operation in Los Angeles in 1972 or 73.
Okay, very interesting.
So, but that never made it to the press in San Francisco. So that was just one more thing. Kind of talking about this same trip to Brazil and who his friend was there. I think that he was somebody who was drawn to power with whomever he needed to make whatever kind of
Sure.
liaison. I think, and so, who knows about that? I certainly don't know it, and I couldn't guess it. It wouldn't be a fact, and I like to go by facts. That's why I like to talk just about what I know and what I experienced. But
let me ask you this. Let me ask you this then, okay? Because now you came out of your short period of time with the Black Panthers and your short period of time with SDS and these type of activities. Now, so there must have been a lot of discussion, especially with the Black Panthers and SDS. Hey, so-and-so is an informant. So-and-so is COINTELPRO. So-and-so is a double agent. No, that stuff goes on constantly. Did you ever see anything like that going on in the People's Temple, that maybe there's infiltrators or people trying to steer things?
Well, from the very beginning, from the probably first day I walked in the temple, Jim made it really clear that we were being monitored, and that there were probably traitors within, and always. And so from the very beginning, from day one, all the way through the very last day in Jonestown, Jim always let us know that we were, we should be suspicious of everybody. And as he got more involved in drugs in Guyana, he was more and more paranoid. So from the very beginning, he was paranoid about any of monitoring and who might be a traitor within, and testing us to see who seemed to be breaking because they, were disloyal. And so that was a very main theme of his all through the years.
And he assumed his phones were tapped.
Yes.
And so I'm supposing, too, that when you were with the Black Panthers and the SDS, everyone assumed their phones were tapped.
That's right. And, I mean, really, on the phone, you could hear clicking that, you didn't hear when you called the local Girl Scouts, but in many calls, you could hear clicking on your line. And I think there was a lot of monitoring going on then. Oh, yeah. So, I mean, I think that, what is the expression? Just because you're paranoid doesn't mean it's not true, or something like that. Like, I'm sure that we were monitored.
If he's on the phone with Angela Davis and Cesar Chavez, I'm sure he was too. I'm sure there's no doubt about it. I would love to hear those tapes. My God.
Right. So, I mean, I think that, he acknowledged that we were monitored, but he actually made like a boogeyman outside the window in every setting. So he not only acknowledged that everything was monitored, but he also built up this theme for us, feeling that we were isolated, one of a kind, that we were the chosen people, and that we had to know that people were outside watching us, watching for any, break in our veneer or things like that. So he played on that a lot, always saying that, that's why he would say things like, don't wash your dirty laundry in public. He had a Spanish saying, no lava su ropa sucio in public, or something like that. Like, he would say, you can't talk about what's going on in the temple to anybody outside of the temple. And so that was just one of the major themes. And so even when I worked at the welfare department, I couldn't tell people I was part of People's Temple, even when they knew. I mean, we had 7 people work at the welfare department in Ukiah. And so some of us lived in the same commune. So there would be days that I would wear something that someone else in the commune had worn the day before to the welfare department.
Okay, right.
So, I mean, we were pretty sad revolutionaries at that point. We're not very astute in those ways.
Oh boy, what a life, man! I tell you. So what happens next?
Just a couple more situations. One of the communes we lived in, one of the people got a job reading bingo numbers on the morning news at 6:00 in the morning. So in the commune, we all got up so we could watch him on the TV program, because, first of all, he was exhausted. So, his eyes always looked red, and he had gotten 2 hours sleep, which he probably did. And so we would get there, and he would say, he would be on the TV show, and he would say, B3, and then he would let people, find their card or whatever it was, and he'd kind of knock out between the B3 and the O16. And so we would just be in stitches watching him read these bingo numbers and nodding off in between his numbers.
And meanwhile, he's wearing your T-shirt you wore last night.
Yeah, that's right. We were pretty heartless, considering we were all in the same suit. But anyway, but there were situations that, there was a hilarity that we just shared, with some of these situations that were just priceless and unique, And we also had, when we got into a car, because we were totally sped up, we had kind of routine that we would do. Like, we would get in the car and we would just calm ourselves down and take a deep breath for a minute. And before we got in the car, we would pound on the the front of the car because somebody had turned on their ignition and a cat had been under there looking for heat during the cold winters and had killed a cat. So we started having these. There's another word for it in cults, and I can't remember what the word is.
Rituals.
But yeah, rituals. So we would, like walk out to our car, bang on the front hood, walk around the car to kind of check it all out and make sure there were no flat tires, get in the car, sit for a minute without, nobody moving really or talking or anything, and then we drive off. And so it just got to be so hilarious to try and figure out how we could do it when we were in public. How do you do that in the middle of San Francisco on a busy street, when, and so, there were just so many kind of inside jokes that it was just really a fun time. It wasn't that time that we were somber looking like the American Gothic. We were it was just hysterical. So many things were so funny. And the people who were involved in People's Temple were just the best. So you never had to worry about any kind of racism or anything else. And so there was a level of communication that went way beyond anything you said, because you were with people who, appreciated humor, appreciated life, appreciated the purity of the experiment we thought we were in. And so, I don't know the camaraderie we had with these great people. There's just nothing like it. I've really never found anything like it since I came back either. It's just was such a treasure. And so, that's what kept me in it. That's what, motivated me to go to Guyana and everything. So you're with the best people you ever met in the world, and you made a group. And so that was the synergy that kept us together.
Gotcha. Okay. So
about that time in the 70s, when Jim was mostly in San Francisco, there were some of us still in Redwood Valley, a bunch of people in Los Angeles, and one of our members in San Francisco overdosed on drugs.
Okay.
And so one of our young kids. And so we kind of, we regrouped at our planning commission. I was on the planning commission, which was kind of a group that Jim put together to run his ideas through, and there were about 90 of us, and it was a mixture of all kinds of different people. And I was in that from 1972. But so in about 1974, we started talking about, okay, so we had this kid OD. We try and take kids up to Redwood Valley to live in homes up there. We try and get people out of jail and get off of drugs. We'd have all these things going, and yet so many of our family members live in dire circumstances. They live in a drug-infested area. They're in schools where they sell drugs. What can we do to protect our kids? And then the idea came up. It seemed spontaneous, but of course, now that we know that Jim had already been to Guyana and he had all this other questionable stuff in the past, it was less innocent than it seemed. But at the time we said, well, maybe what we have to do is find another place where we can develop our own community and keep drugs out of it and protect our kids and, set up our utopian community. And so we decided on Guyana because it was half Black and half East Indian. It was in the tropics. It was English speaking. And it had a socialist government, and they had property that we could lease because they were trying to populate the Northwest District. So in many ways, Guyana seemed like the logical place for us to go. So we sent a group down to check it out. And I went down for the first trip in 1975 and saw, in December of 75, 100 members of the Planning Commission went down to look at Guyana and look at where Jonestown would be built.
Let me ask you a question, because there's some speculation on the internet that location was formerly the site of CIA training of anti-Congo guerrillas or something?
No, the site was nothing. The site was a path across the Northwest District. There was nothing there.
There was nothing there, okay.
Nothing there. They were crisscrossed by paths, but there was absolutely nothing there.
And these are walking paths you're describing?
That's right, yeah.
Okay.
There were no roads. And so, because I did see that. So we went down in 75, and really the minute I got off the plane in Guyana, I was already in love with it. It was like heaven. You walk through through the rainforest and you see bird of paradises, on the side of the road, or you hear monkeys. And I mean, really, it was just beautiful. Everything about it was just awesome. And I guess because I had seen it when it was really nothing and just paths, I was prepared for the pretty primitive existence that we had when we were first there. And I think that some people who had not seen it early on, I think Jim created this visual image of a place that was much more developed, which it wasn't. So,
what about stuff like dengue fever? There's huge diseases down there that you can get. But,
once again, none of us got anything there.
Okay.
None of us got any, like 1,000 people there. None of us, we all got our shots before we left. And so, I mean, none of us got anything there.
Really? Okay.
And also in Jonestown, it wasn't near water, so there were no mosquitoes in Jonestown. In Georgetown, there were huge mosquitoes, and they were more huge after they sucked all my blood. So in Georgetown, there were huge mosquitoes. But by the time you got to Jonestown, there were no sitting pools of water. So, that wasn't an issue. There were many issues, but those weren't issues. And the disease, those were not issues because we had taken the meds and we had our own medical clinic there, so people could, come and go. And
well, let me ask you this, because there's another thing on the internet about that there were daily medical exams for everyone in Jonestown.
No, we didn't have enough doctors for daily medical exams.
Okay.
At all. So I mean, what I found is that there's all kinds of speculations. The horrific things that happened are unquestionable. That 918 people died on November 18th. Things can't get any worse than that.
Right.
And so there's no need to fabricate, BS when the worst horror of all horrors happened. And so, in a way, it demeans the whole situation to have lies that were not true. There is enough bad news that did happen. To make things up is just so pointless to me.
Well, let me ask you this, because Congressman Leo Ryan's aide himself, I've heard him say it on tape. He believed the whole thing was a CIA type operation or some kind of a COINTELPRO mind control MK Ultra kind of deal.
I think that it would be easy to believe that if you had not seen Jim's decline.
Right.
Because I saw, I lived in Guyana for 2 years, and I saw, and I was in the temple, so I saw, really Jim at his very best, which really was Redwood Valley. And when he started being sucked into the power vortex, in San Francisco, and then we went to Guyana. I saw that whole process that he went through, and then when he got to Guyana, and he was pretty much at the end under house arrest because of the different custody issues that had been taken to Guyana because people wanted to get their kids out. That whole process, I saw it, and it was. It's hard for me to believe that it was anything other than Jim shooting himself in the foot. And so, I don't have any way of knowing that, and there is a survivor who believes that also. But she was never in Guyana, and I think those of us who were in Guyana who saw the whole thing, and then the last day when Jim's secretaries and mistresses, put out the vats and everything, I think that if you were there watching the procession, it can't just be blamed on something outside of Jim Jones and what was going on there.
Well, let me ask you a question, because you mentioned one of the other survivors, Leslie Wilson, in her book. She describes that seeing a Jim Jones lookalike.
There were times, there was a person who looked enough like Jim that he was in situations in the United States so that he could draw fire if there was ever an attempt on Jim's life. That's true.
So Jim had a double that he would use. Now, what about the story about that his passport was used in 2 different locations?
I don't know about that.
Okay.
Jim's passport was used?
Yeah.
What do you mean 2 different locations? I have never heard anything about that.
Okay, well, I have a note about it. It just says that his passport was being used in 2 locations at the same time. Which is something I've heard about other people as well. But if you don't know about it, you don't know about it.
Yeah, I don't know. I've heard a lot of things over the years, but that's a new one. And I don't know what that proves. Does that prove that his lookalike was traveling as him one place and he was someplace else? I don't know. I don't really know if that impacts the overall story or not.
Okay. Okay, so then we're getting to the point now where you're gung-ho to move down to Guyana.
That's right. So so we went down there in 1975. We sent a crew of 20 or 25 people down there to take down this rainforest, build up roads, put in housing for us and stuff like that. So starting in the beginning of 76, we had crews down there building things and getting ready. And
Are
so
these
we
crews
had
of local people or people you sent down there?
Yeah. People who were temple members who had construction backgrounds.
Okay.
And who could, and so we sent people who had skills that would be helpful in, putting electricity in and doing pipes and all the roads and housing and all that. And tearing, heavy equipment operators who could tear down the rainforest and plow it so that it was level, all that. So we had crews down there doing this enormous job of tearing down the rainforest and getting our housing ready.
How many square acres was all this property?
I would say it was 276,000 acres, but I actually am not sure because the last I heard, somebody said that wasn't the right number. So I've forgotten how much territory it is now. And I'm in my library, but I don't see my books that I would look. I can't find the books right now to find exactly how much. I'll have to look that up because I did know that at one point, but I don't remember now.
But still, that's an enormous project.
Yeah, it was an enormous project, but we were just in the center of it, and the rest of it was going to be plantings because we wanted to be self-sufficient. Okay. We didn't know then that we could never be self-sufficient on that land, but so we were going to get ready trying. But they were primarily building housing at the beginning, like the downtown part where we'd have the pavilion and the senior housing dormitories would be close in and showers and bathrooms and things like that. So that was their responsibility to set that up.
Did you have like a movie theater?
We had a pavilion, an open-air pavilion where we had our meetings most nights. And we also, had a theater. It was also where we'd watch movies.
What kind of movies?
But, you didn't need walls there because it was warm. Yeah. It's not like you needed a wall. And at night, there were no street lights or anything to blur what you needed to see on the movie. There was no, you weren't downtown San Diego or anything. So,
what kind of movies?
We always watched political movies, like we would see Joe Hill or Z or a lot of the movies about Martin Luther King, a lot of biographical documentaries of radicals and revolutionaries over history. So we watched a lot of movies like that. Not so much fluff, like we didn't watch many Disney movies, but we watched things that had a theme that went along with hard work, pioneer movies, things like that. Things that would inspire us.
I got you.
Mm-hmm. So in after 75, we all came back, and I went back to work at the welfare department, and things were moving on in Guyana, and starting 1977. The project in Jonestown needed more support and more input. So people started going down at 20 or 30 a month who had expertise in other parts of building the community. So in March of 1977, Jim asked me if I would go down to Guyana, and I would live in Georgetown. And my job was to fill the boat with all the heavy equipment supplies and replacement parts and food and, shoes and all kinds of different things that we were going to need in the community in Jonestown. And we had a boat called the Cudjoe, and the Cudjoe would come into Georgetown, and I would fill it from top to bottom.
How big was
with
the boat?
Supplies. Huh?
How big was the boat?
I'm not a good size person, but it seemed like it was, it was ocean work worthy because to get back to Jonestown, you had to go up the coast 12 hours on the ocean and then head up the rivers into the internal part of Guyana.
Was the boat
It was
big
a
enough to fit
24-hour boat ride.
Could the boat fit a container, like a container ship, like a container on top of the boat, or no?
It had a deep well inside the boat for
so like
supplies.
One of those big fishing ships like you'd see on dangerous fishing shows. You see on
yes. Kind of like that. And it had like several bedrooms on top, and then it had a whole hold where we would bring in supplies. So so it was, so whatever would be like a cabin. A boat with a cabin, a 6 or 8 person cabin or something like that.
Gotcha.
So I would fill up the boat with everything, and it would leave, and it would take a day to get back into Jonestown. So 24 hours by boat. Then they'd offload everything and Port Kaituma, which was the closest dock, and then they'd turn the boat around, and then it would come back to Georgetown. So every 3 or 4 days, I had to completely fill the boat, and we had radio contact, so they would send in the shopping list, and I'd have to get whatever I needed. And when people flew into Georgetown, they'd likely go out to Jonestown on the boat. Some people flew in, but flights in Guyana, it depended on if the pilot wanted to go, or if it was raining, or if it was sunny, or if he had something else he wanted to do, or if it was Thursday. I mean, it was very serendipitous. So you could never plan on any kind of air transportation in Guyana. So the boat was the most predictable. It would come back every few days, and it would take people back into Jonestown. So that was my job in Georgetown, and I did that for a year. So I went back and forth into Jonestown from time to time, and I did love the boat trip. I thought, it was just exquisite being on the ocean and then going up, the small rivers in Guyana, and there'd be Amerindians along the coast, and everybody would wave, and I don't know, it was just really.
Have you been back down there?
Glorious. I haven't been back, but a group of us are going to go back in October. So I'll get back into that in just a minute, but we are going to go back. A bunch of us want to go back one last time. So anyway, so I stayed in Georgetown for a year, then got myself in trouble in Georgetown, and I moved, and I was called back to Jonestown. So then I was in Jonestown for nearly a year.
How'd you get in trouble? Come on, tell me, how'd you get in trouble?
Well, it's all written out in the book, but one of my jobs in Georgetown, we were always busy all the time. So one of my jobs was to leave the house at 11 o'clock at night. I had the only car, and I had to go out to the airport an hour away, pick people up, pick up all their duffel bags and boxes and everything, and bring them back, and then make the trip again to go back and get more stuff. So as I was tooling my way through Georgetown on my different jobs, I met a pharmacist who, was kind of I don't know. He said he could help out. So one day he had his 2 buddies who had vans also all come with me out to the airport in an hour away, and we picked everybody up in one trip. And so, I was just so delighted and relieved. And then we went out and had kind of a date.
Ooh.
So when I came back to the house, I was never good at lying. So they said, "Okay, so Laura, did you have sex with the guy?" And I said, well, yes. I'd been celibate for 7 years, right? So I said, yes. And so then the next day I was flown out to Jonestown, or I can't remember how I went out then, but immediately went to Jonestown.
Well, this is scandalous. I don't know if we can even continue this show. Hearing about this event.
Just like that.
This is horrible. Okay, so you got in a little bit of trouble because you went on a date. Okay.
So I got to Jonestown, and I worked in Jonestown for the next year. And so you have to picture, to understand what happened these next 12 months or so, you have to realize that we were in the middle of a rainforest, 24 hours by boat from any place. No one ever heard of Georgetown. Most people I meet today can't find Guyana on the map. So we were remote, times 3 in the middle of the rainforest, our only contact was a radio. So Jim would listen to the BBC or some news. It would be cycled through his paranoia at that time because he was heavy into drugs in Guyana. He was physically ill. I mean, his doctor said he had some kind of a brain disease that kept him with a high fever, but he couldn't leave Jonestown because at that point, I think I forgot to say, Jim came to Guyana and stayed after the summer of 1977. So he was in Jonestown. He went back and forth to Georgetown from time to time, but pretty much he was in Jonestown from the summer of 77 on. So when he, so I lost my train of thought. So just how isolated it was. So Jim had contact with what was going on in San Francisco and L.A. by a radio, a ham radio. And so everything had to be code because we couldn't take care of business on the ham radio. It was the family station or you had to take care of conversations, but you couldn't take care of business on that particular band of the radio. So everything was coded, and really people in Jonestown had no way of checking any information that Jim would come up with. There was no alternate channel to listen to. There was no other source of information. So Jim was there, and that's when he completely bought that we were being monitored and that there were people around every corner and that the Guyanese Defense Force was ready to come over the mountain and, take over all of Jonestown, and all of these scenarios that he continued to talk about and share so that the people were really paranoid that there is an enemy just outside the border of the community. And so he started that, and we started having what the media has started dubbing as white nights. We'd have everybody surround the community in Jonestown with pitchforks and the scythes that we had and the different tools we had. We had a few guns, but it wasn't a situation that we would have guns. It just everybody in all of Jonestown would be standing in this circle to defend Jonestown. And so he would have us there, sometimes it would be for 3 hours, then we'd just all go to bed. One night in May, it was until, early in the morning, and then he had everybody go to bed and, wake up later in the morning. But really, I think that's when his paranoia was at its most extreme.
But then what about the next day when you woke up? Wouldn't people say to each other, hey, man, nothing happened again. What's this guy doing?
I think that he would persuade us that we had scared them off when they saw that we were all awake and ready for them to come in. Okay. I mean, he would somehow couch, come up with some story. He was a genius at coming up with just the right answer that we needed to hear. And, the other thing about Jonestown is that nobody could talk about complaints. If I woke up and I thought to myself, that was ridiculous yesterday, there was nobody I could really talk to about it. It was as bad as it was under Hitler, right, with the children running to the Gestapo if their parents said something negative about Hitler. There was a complete control over any kind of negative conversation.
Yeah, what about on the internet now? There's some of these these audio tapes of the disciplinary sessions and stuff that went on.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, that part's different, I think, than what Jim was trying to create with us. But I think that even with the discipline, Jim's theory about in justifying the means, when he would take on if somebody said, I want to leave, if it got, if that information got back to Jim, he would confront the person in our business meetings or in our family meetings in the pavilion, and then that person would be told to shut up and not talk like that, right. People would be told, what, we're here, you're already here now, we've brought you down, we paid for it. Can you just work for 1 year, get everything together, and at the end, when Jonestown is all together because we've created it with our hard work, anybody who wants to go could leave. And, Jim would say that. And at the time, because that was so far from anything I was thinking about, leaving or not, I thought to myself, if we got everybody working together, it wouldn't be so primitive. We'd have these houses, we'd have everything together. People could leave and that would be fine. So at the time, I was convinced that we're just asking people to put in the work. Looking back, of course, it's absurd. that here are these adults who didn't want to be there. They should have, been given a ticket back. Or some people we should have kicked out and gotten rid of anyway. I mean, no matter how you do it, there was no point in keeping somebody who didn't want to be there. And, not only illegal, but just, immoral. People should have been let to go.
Let me
but
ask
at
you a
the
question,
time,
too.
when you're in the middle.
I know, when you're in the thick of it, yeah, and you were all gung-ho, you were going for it. But now, what about Jim Jones' son? Because in some of these tapes, you can hear him. Now, is he part of these reunions and get-togethers that you guys have now?
So, Jim had a lot of sons. So he had Stephen, Jimmy, Lou were his sons in Guyana. And then he had a bunch of kids who were kind of his adopted sons who wanted to change their names to Jones. Right. So I'm not sure which tapes, but I will get to them in just a minute.
Okay, sorry.
Because they're part of in the way that things ended. So anyway, that's kind of a picture of what's going on in Jonestown. Jim is more paranoid. He can't leave. He has, profound words of wisdom to tell us, and we're all asleep because we've been working in the field all day. He's under house arrest in Jonestown. He can't really go in because of the custody issues that the government wants to resolve before he's seen around town too much. So that was what we saw in Jonestown. But every week, we had new housing go up. The food was getting better. We were planting more produce. We were a little bit closer to being somewhat self-sufficient, although we never would have been. So we were making progress in Jonestown, and those of us who weren't listening to Jim or not watching him carefully, we saw the community itself flourishing. It's because we saw, beautiful babies born every week, and everything was going on. But while that was happening back in the United States, there were people and investigative reporters and New West Magazine that were saying, who's Jim Jones? We hear these rumors that people are being held against their will in Guyana. Who is this guy who has so much power here? He's not an elected official. He's not somebody who, we give power to, and yet all these politicians call on him when they need people at press conferences. They call on him to be, references or supporters and things. What's going on with him? And one of the investigative reporters from New West Magazine was going to research and investigate who Jim was, where he got his power, and what he was doing. So at this point, that's when, he would have made public the information about Jim in the bathroom in L.A. He would have brought a whole lot of other things to the public eye that Jim had been able to squash over the years because of his contacts. Right. So he started doing this. And so Jim called around and started pulling in his chips. He said, I brought these people to your press conference. I brought these people to your meeting. Our people voted for you, and you won by, 650 votes, which is, easily our congregation and more. I mean, I've done all these things for you. You need to stop this article. So he did everything in his power to stop the article in the New West Magazine. And including death threats on the editor, Marshall Kilduff, and death threats to the office of the investigator, and all these politicians calling on them to not, sully the name of Jim Jones when he's done so much for the city. So Jim tried everything, and New West Magazine said, you know what, we're going to run with the story. And so that was in the summer of 78, and so Jim flooded people down to Guyana. Even though we weren't ready in Jonestown for an influx of another 80 or 100 people a month, he just had everybody from San Francisco who was ready to go to Guyana, because he was afraid if the negative press got out, it would stop the flow of people coming to Guyana, and he wanted people there first before it hit the news. So in the summer of 78, it was the most primitive condition in Jonestown because we had people that we weren't prepared for who were rushed down, and we didn't have enough housing. The food was never, we never had steaks and stuff like that, but the food was manageable but not fancy. So people who came down to Guyana who weren't ready for kind of a primitive existence, at least at the beginning, they were unhappy there. They didn't understand why they were brought down when we weren't ready for them. But it was really to run ahead of the tidal wave of this new disclosure. So at the end of 70 and the end of the summer, Congressman Ryan was contacted by the concerned relatives in Oakland. So they said that, there are people being held against their will. And then he talked to a couple of people who had left the temple, Debbie Layton and some others, who said that, horrible things were going on in Jonestown and somebody needed to go down. And Congressman Leo Ryan said, okay, well, I'm going to go visit Jonestown and see what it's like. So he made plans to go down and visit Jonestown, and Jim said, no, don't come. You're not allowed in here. It's not American property, and we're not in your territory. You have no rights to go. But Congressman Ryan said, these are American citizens, so I need to go down and see what's going on. And Jim did everything he could to stop Ryan, including booking all the airplanes in Georgetown that could have taken Ryan out to Jonestown. Jim booked the airplanes for 3 days and paid them not to take anybody anywhere. I mean, he tried everything to keep Ryan from going to Jonestown.
How did he get down there then?
So he had flown into Georgetown, and then after 3 days, Jim realized that, Ryan wasn't going to go back until he got to Jonestown. So he finally gave in. So he let Ryan come in, and some of the entourage with him, some of the concerned relatives that had been in, in the Bay Area, and some of the news media, and they came, and Jim, had the Jonestown community put on this wonderful program that night, and on a lot of the tapes, it shows Congressman Ryan saying, how he appreciated the talent, and obviously a lot of people in Guyana loved being there, and he was really delighted that he was able to see it. And then Ryan stepped off the podium, and from that minute on, people started passing him notes saying, I need to leave when you go. I want to go with you. Don't trust Jim to send me in 2 weeks. He won't do it. I want to go with you. So by the next morning, Ryan had, 20 or 25 people who wanted to leave with him that day. And he hadn't come prepared to take anybody back. There were no seats on the plane coming into Jonestown. He didn't have any extra seats for people to go. Oh, wow. So he had to order up a new plane in Georgetown, which, as I explained, is more complicated than it might seem. So he got another plane to fly in, and he was going to take the 20 people out. And those are, there are a lot of videos about how Jim was so totally incoherent that day. So that was on November 18th. About 3 weeks before that, Jim sent me into Georgetown to take up my old job because they said people in Georgetown really wanted to come back out and see their families. And so could I be trusted to go back into Georgetown? So I said yes. I loved all parts of Guyana. I would have been happy in Jonestown or Georgetown. So I was living in Georgetown during this last 3 weeks, along with the basketball team, which included two of Jim's sons, Stephen and Jimmy, and, many other of the survivors were at the house. So about 50 of us were in the house in Georgetown. And then everybody else was in Jonestown. And
where did Mark Lane,
Jonestown.
Where did Mark Lane live?
He was on the Jonestown property, but he and Charles Gary had cottages that were kind of off the beaten track of the community. Like they were kind of guest cottages some distance away. I don't know if it was like a quarter of a mile away from the pavilion in a kind of more secluded area.
Okay.
And so when Ryan was leaving, he, was leaving on a truck, and soon after his truck left, Jim sent a truckload of people with guns to the airstrip with specific instructions to kill Ryan and to kill, everybody, but for sure Ryan and any of the news media that would have, articles or something. So the people in the truck went to the airstrip. They did shoot and kill Congressman Ryan. They shot Jackie Spear, his administrative assistant, and she played dead. And so they passed her and shot 3 or 4 other people. They shot Patty Parks, who was a longtime member in People's Temple, and they shot 3 newspaper reporters. And then they came back to Jonestown, and they drank the poison along with everybody else. And when all that was happening, Jim got on the radio, and he called Georgetown and San Francisco and LA and said, okay, everybody in Jonestown is dying. You need to commit revolutionary suicide, and everybody needs to die right now.
He said this in code, or he said it in regular?
In code.
Okay.
In code. And so in Georgetown, I was there with, the 50 of us lived in the house, but everybody's out. Nobody's, it's not a relaxing time that you sit down and read. We were all over. So Sharon Amos was there, and she had worked with me at the welfare department for 7 years. She sent me to go get the basketball team and get Jim's son, Stephen and Jimmy. So I drove across town and got them and brought them back. And then Sharon and Stephen and Jimmy and some of the other people in the house, more the decision makers in the house really, met in the back bedroom. And Sharon told him that Jim said we should all kill ourselves. And Stephen Jones was 19. He said, absolutely not. We're not doing it. Let me get out to Jonestown. I want to stop it. But, there's really no way to get to Jonestown. It's not, there wasn't a way for him to do that. But he said, let me get out to Jonestown, I'll stop it. But we are not doing it. That is over. No more. And so then he called San Francisco and LA and said, you know what, don't follow the instruction. It's all over. Don't do a thing. Just pause. Stop everything. So really, Stephen stopped it everywhere. And that was in the house in Georgetown, but the rest of us didn't even know about the discussion. We didn't know about the call. We didn't know about the discussion. We went about our business and went to, there was a political talent show a couple blocks away. We went to that. Other people went to other events and everything. So we left the house. When we came back, the Guyanese Defense Force had taken over the house.
Wait a second.
They had us all sit down.
You never heard the order to kill yourself?
No.
Would you have done it, do you think?
If I had been in Jonestown, I can't imagine surviving that.
Wow.
I mean, it was really hard for me not being there to keep going when everything, my breath was knocked out of me. Everything that I had worked for 7 years, everything that I loved, all the people I loved, all my memories, all of that was just wiped out.
Yeah.
And so I can't imagine thinking that for some reason I was special enough to live through it when all my friends and family and everybody was killed. I just can't imagine it. So
the Guyanese forces took over the house, yeah.
Yeah, so in the house in Georgetown, we were all sitting down in the living room where the Guyanese Defense Force had us sit, and then they brought out 4 body bags of Sharon Amos and her 3 kids. She had killed herself and her 3 children in the house. So even though Stephen had stopped it for the rest of us and we never got the word, she had the instruction direct from Jim. And so she could not just ignore it. So she did kill her 3 children and herself that day in the house. And those were the only ones who were killed in the house, just her.
Oh, this is just incredible. Now, when the Guyanese forces came in, were they holding you at gunpoint? Were they in there with rifles and stuff?
I always laugh because the Guyanese Defense Force sounds like such a tough name, but they were really kind of like the National Guard. You know what I mean? They were all 17 and 18. They didn't know what they were doing there. So we said, well, why are you even here? And they said, well, I don't know, somebody said we were protecting you from yourselves. I don't really get it. You know what I mean? They were anything but, bullies. They were not, They
were kids, yeah, which a lot of our military kids
presence. They were armed, but it was a very calm presence. They didn't come in, with their guns pointed or anything. They didn't know what to do. Nobody knew what to do. Nobody from the top down could even figure out what happened first.
Right.
It was too unbelievable. And so they were there because somebody told them to be there. But, they didn't know the details of what was going on in Jonestown either. Nobody knew.
What happens next?
So at that point, they took Sharon Amos and her children, the body bags out, and the rest of us were just stunned and traumatized. And then we started listening to some of the reports. And the Guyana government put a squash. They blacked out all the news media locally. So you couldn't find out anything that was going on in Guyana. The international press was there, and they would talk about what was going on, and they could talk to the Guyanese and interview them and then play it for the BBC or somebody else. But nobody could, there was no news report in Guyana of what was going on in Jonestown, because really the government had to figure out what they had, gotten themselves into with Jim Jones. And so before they made any public statement, there's even like some of the pilots who took Congressman Ryan into Jonestown or into Port Kaituma, they had to go to the mansion of the president at that point, Forbes Burnham, the premier, and debrief him with what had happened at the airstrip. Nobody could believe it. The whole scenario was so just astounding. Nobody was quick at trying to figure out what to do next because they were so unprepared.
Okay, I got to interrupt you. I got to interrupt you because we're down to 1 minute left on. We're going to drop 2 stations. I hope you can stay longer.
Okay, yes.
Okay, good. Thank you. Okay, so but before we drop these 2 stations, real quick, tell people how they can get a hold of you if they want to book you. Tell us quick.
Okay, so I have a website, www.jonestownsurvivor.com. I have a Facebook page, jonestownsurvivor.com. You can always Google my name. My books are for sale on Amazon.com and Kindle and Nook, and I have an audio book, and so I have all those and the Whisper program. I love questions. I do travel all over the country to universities and libraries. I'm a Quaker. I go to Quaker venues and conferences. And so I like to keep the conversation going because we have so much to learn about what happened in Jonestown. I'm a retired teacher, so now my time is my own. I've been a bilingual teacher for 25 years, and so that's kind of it.
And if you want to get a hold of her, email me, oppermanreport.com. I'll make sure that she gets the message, okay? We're going to take a little break. You can call in after this, 702-605-4894. You can call in with questions. There's way more, oh my God, that we haven't gotten to in this story. It's just unbelievable. Thank you so much. Oh my God, let's take a break. Okay, let's take a break, and I'll have to calm down myself. This is amazing. And we'll be back with more of Laura Johnston Kohl, Jonestown survivor. And we'll be back after these messages.